guest this week on the Sales Code Leadership Podcast is Adam Kay. Adam is the Chief Revenue Officer at Playroll, your partner for global talent. Adam, how are you today?
Very well, thanks, Kevin. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm okay. Not top. And in sales, we're always supposed to be like, yeah, we're busting the world. I'm struggling a bit, but I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I'm sure like good salespeople, Adam, we will lift each other up and motivate.
If you can't do it now, Kevin, it's the end of the quarter. You've got that final bit of fuel in the tank to get you over the line. Unless you're fully ahead of your target already, then of course it's absolutely fine to be winding down at this point in the quarter.
It's good that you remind me of that, because I've lived through so many quarters as a sales leader. When you run your own business, it doesn't feel the same. Actually, I kind of miss that. I know I shouldn't. Yeah.
I always wonder if this will ever leave me. I mean, I've had periods in between work of garden leave, and I'm still acutely conscious that it's the end of the quarter, even though I've got no targets and I'm not in employment at the time. It's I feel like it's been ingrained in my DNA, this quarterly cycle. My wife even knows, to treat me a bit carefully, to get a bit softer with me towards the end of the quarter, even when I'm out of work. So
yeah. Well, you're not out of work at the moment, so do tell us, what is it you get paid to do now, Adam?
So I'm, as you said, Chief Revenue Officer here at a company called Playroll. Excuse me. Playroll is an employer of record. So many people have learnt what an employer of record is over the past few years, and it's an industry that really accelerated during the pandemic. It's a legal model, and it's a product that enables you to employ people all over the world. In countries where you do not have an entity. So as a UK business, if I would like to hire somebody in France or Germany or Venezuela, there's a lot of challenges in doing so from a compliance and legal perspective, namely employment contracts, ensuring that we've got the right benefits, ensuring that we've got the right contributions to the tax authorities, and potentially if we need to part ways with employees and ensuring doing so compliantly. So what Playroll does, it has 180 entities through which our clients legally employ their employees, and we second them back to our clients for a small monthly fee.
So this is not specifically not a software company, is it?
It's a great question. It's a debate we have internally quite a lot. I think it's somewhere on the spectrum between services and software. And I think how the industry has evolved historically, it was purely a services business, typically run by companies like the big four accounting firms, where you could provide them with information of employees and they would employ them for you, to, as the industry has really proliferated, to enabling more of a self-serve approach to this, documentation, leave requests, expense approvals through a platform. So I think it's certainly becoming more platform enabled, but absolutely there is a strong service part of it that technology has not been able to displace yet.
So is that quite a change from previous roles that you've held as sales leader with mostly software businesses?
Yeah, typically, yes, it is. I mean, I like change. Very few of my previous roles have looked like the other. I consider myself quite a generalist in that respect. But this is quite different in terms of the service element of it. And as a revenue leader, how do we measure revenue? ARR is not necessarily the accurate metric here, despite it being the prevailing SaaS metric indicator of performance. If we're being honest with ourselves, we are not an ARR or SaaS business, despite having a platform through which you pay a fee to access.
Interesting. And how's that reflected in the sales model, do you think?
Well, it's something that we are continuously evolving, but ultimately the big challenge really is, the way that the cost structure works, it's a monthly fee for every month your employee is hired through our entity. Once they are no longer hired, or working for you, or for us more accurately, you stop paying that fee. So the sales model is quite an interesting one, because again, of course, we're looking for long-term revenue. We're not necessarily looking for these kind of short-term projects, perhaps, because that distorts our performance there. But it's really about effectively a monthly revenue and a monthly run rate, effectively, that enables us to understand our performance. And again, it gives us a bit of an insight into what traditional metrics and traditional attitudes to metrics. So churn, for example, is always perceived as a bad thing, whether voluntary or involuntary. However, with someone like us, we have churn events where a client might have a concentration of employees in a country, let's say 10 employees in a single country, where actually it makes a lot more sense for that client to set up an entity, hire a payroll manager, rather than pay us 10 monthly fees for each employee. Is that a reflection on our business? Well, no, that client has become successful as a result of us being able to hire and pay their employees, yet they've churned away from us.
Yeah.
So again, it's really a refreshing look at what we've looked at traditional metrics and what they mean, and saying, well, how healthy is this business?
Yeah, it's a really good way of putting it, actually, because in a software business, you would definitely see that as failure. If people stop using the service, the software subscription. Never thought of that before. The whole area around selling services is a fascinating one, because, as you know, I mean, I'm running my own business selling services, where I've always sold software subscriptions over the past 25 years. It definitely is a different kind of model to a degree. I think we'll dive more into this perhaps a bit later when we start looking at what makes a great salesperson and sales teams, which I know are two favorite topics for you. So we'll definitely crack into those. I'm keen to uncover a bit more of your bio, because the listener to the Sales Code Leadership podcast is very interested in you, Adam.
Wow. Okay. I've got to question the judgment of your listeners.
So is this career anything like what you had in mind at 16?
No, absolutely not. Although I'm not quite sure what I had in mind at 16. If I'm being honest, Kevin, I'm not quite sure what I have in mind at 42. I, like many people, fell into sales. It was a skill. It was a job I deliberately chose, but it was probably kind of at the time, the late noughties, in the UK, sales, particularly software sales, was not really perceived as a career. SaaS was not a thing. My first job was in a SaaS business, and most of my job was explaining what SaaS was rather than what the product was that we were selling. But no, it was a skill that I was learning to acquire rather than a career I was hoping to pursue. And I started my career as a corporate lawyer. Which,
oh, really?
I
always get very nervous around lawyers and policemen, or people that have been either of those things. Now I'm going to be more careful what I say.
Well, I wasn't a criminal lawyer, and I wasn't a very good corporate lawyer either.
Right.
But it was something that I was never clear what I wanted to do at university. It was deemed a prestigious career, well-paid career.
Yeah.
And it was very exciting. I didn't really understand much of what I was getting myself into, but I learned a lot about myself, particularly over the 2 years that I was training as a lawyer. Again, it afforded me 2 extra years of studying, where I got paid to study post-university to do my professional exams. But it taught me a lot about myself around what I'm interested in, what I'm not interested in, and also not tolerating certain feelings when it comes to work. And, with due respect to the law, I didn't enjoy it very much. I mean, I really didn't enjoy it. I mean, we've all had periods in our career where we've not been happy in our job. We've not been happy with our employer. We've not been happy with our performance. But I don't know if you've ever had that feeling in the pit of your stomach on a Sunday evening when you think about the week ahead, and it's dread. It's not fear. It's not kind of slight anxiety. It is dread at just the thought of going through the entire week again. And when you have that week after week after week, it's your body and your mind telling you there isn't a fit here. And I somehow, and I don't know why, but I listened to that, and I decided to reset my career after qualifying, and was going to start again. Clearly, I didn't learn or listen hard enough as an auditor. In one of the kind of the big four firms.
Yeah, I tell you what, Adam, you are a sucker for punishment, aren't you? You've got to be a lawyer and auditor. Man, oh man.
I am. But again, I grew up, my father's an accountant. I grew up with this kind of environment of gain a profession. You'll always have something to fall back on, etc. So kind of, I felt like my choices were rather limited, although I always felt I had this entrepreneurial flair. And so I thought, again, I don't know what I want to do. It's a good skill to acquire. It will lead to something comfortable in the end, and I've just got to go through it. But I recognized, as I said, there was a skill I wanted to acquire, mainly driven by this uncertainty of what I wanted to do in my career. I didn't know I wanted to be an auditor. I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I said, well, whatever it is I end up doing, sales is a skill I'm going to need. If that's a partner in an accounting firm, or if that's an entrepreneur, sales is still the skill that you will need to be successful. So I found a a SaaS startup in the UK. It was a grad role. I got very lucky. I didn't know what I was looking for in a sales role. I didn't really know what sales was. But I just landed in the right place. Great training, great product, great opportunities.
Do you think it was harder to sell SaaS then, when you had to spend quite a bit of time explaining what it was and justifying running something in the cloud as opposed to on-premise and all the security issues typically around that people were worried about? Or is it harder now, where you've got a much more competitive market with more people in it and a bit of a downturn over the last year or so in the tech market? What are your thoughts on that, Adam?
I mean, I think there's a lot related to the macro environment at any time. I find it hard. It's hard to compare like for like. Yes, as you've said, there was certain attitudes and openness to procuring SaaS solutions versus a much more kind of saturated competitive landscape today. I think, again, in context, I started my sales career in 2009, which was the credit crunch. I mean, the economy was on its knees. I was selling into the UK, into kind of large corporates. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't, with due respect to the product, it wasn't necessarily a solution that was business critical. It was perhaps departmental critical. There was value. It was a media monitoring solution like Google Alerts, but we were charging people for it. It was.
So you in that interesting area where you were charging for a premium service, something they could get for nothing from Google.
Well, yes, not quite the same, but yes, effectively similar value.
Which is a hard sell, isn't it?
It is a hard sell.
Because you've got to justify that marginal difference in the product as being very significant value to the client.
Absolutely. And again, when you talk about today's environment where every industry has got 1,000,001 competitors, when your competitor is Google and free, I mean, there is no harder competitor to beat there. But likewise, budgets were being slashed and we were selling into the kind of PR comms departments of organizations, which are probably some of the first budgets to be cut when companies are looking at spend there. So is it harder to sell today or back in the kind of the late noughties? I wouldn't say so. I think there's still a lot of the fundamentals that remain the same. And if you're focused, if you are clear on your ICP, your value proposition, your mission criticality, your ability to build relationships, those fundamentals are as true today as they were then.
How successful were you in that first software sales run?
I was thankfully successful, and I wouldn't say it was down to any innate skills that I had. Truly, I was not the best salesperson in the team, but I think what I was lucky is that I'd inherited this immense work rate from my time as a corporate lawyer, when I was sleeping in the office 3 nights a week and kind of leaving the office before 8 o'clock was considered kind of half day. And what that enabled me to do is to really think about working smart. And I think that's half the battle in sales, which is, how am I spending my time right now? And, this was a traditional role. And what was great about it, as I said, is it was a 360 role. I didn't have an SDR. I didn't have a pre-sales engineer. I was doing my own prospecting. With revenue operations was not even a concept then, let alone sales operations. So I had to find my own accounts. I had to find my own contacts. I had to find the numbers. I had to outreach. I had to demo. I had to negotiate. I even did a bit of account management before you handed over to kind of an account manager, which was hard, but it gave me this incredible education of the sales cycle. But it also enabled me to think about planning my time. And I realized that because it was a high velocity, low value sales motion, you could and did sometimes close a deal in one call. It was quite rare, but it was possible. There was a realization that the more people you spoke to, the more chance there was of closing a deal. And that's a lesson that I've actually still taken a little bit into my psyche when I'm onboarding reps right now. And I talk about ramp, and I talk about reps who are very nervous to get started. And I try and reassure them and say to them, look, your 100th call will be better than your first. We know that. So let's get you to 100 calls as quickly as possible. Because, that's when you're going to be at your best. But it was a lot of that philosophy, which was, if I'm spending time during the day, during the hours at which I am possibly able to get somebody on the phone, building lists, doing admin, updating CRM, then the opportunity cost of that time is a signed contract or several signed contracts. And I realized that, don't do any admin between the hours of 9 and 6. In particular, kind of 8:30 to 9:30 and 5 to 6. I always called them the golden hours. The kind of PAs or the gatekeepers have probably gone home, but the buyers are still there. Whereas my colleagues were going to the pub at 5 o'clock, as people in sales did then. And I was there till 7, building my prospect list, building my call list, so that 8:30 the next morning, I could just be hitting the phone. It is a bit kind of, Hollywood movie sales kind of stereotype, but there was a relationship between activity and results back then, especially when it was a relatively homogenous script as well.
Yeah. I remember working for a boss years ago who said to me, Kevin, you can't guarantee results, but you can guarantee activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously you don't get the results without the activity. Some of this it's still an activity game to a large degree.
Yeah.
Because business, for very few people, does business actually walk in the door. I think increasingly less so in a competitive market.
Yeah. I think we've evolved somewhat since. And I mean, I alluded to the process of turning over loads of stones and seeing what's underneath and hoping to find something valuable.
Yeah.
It was a lot of trial and error. It was, just playing the numbers game. And I think today we have got a lot more sophisticated in terms of honing in on ICP.
Yeah.
And, one maxim I like to live by, particularly from an outbound motion, but also from an inbound motion, which is, how do I get the right message to the right person at the right time? Mm-hmm. And those are 3 distinct pillars that, as a go-to-market motion, you should be thinking about.
Yeah.
My time in this company, I didn't think about that at all. It's how can I speak to as many companies as possible, hoping that if I speak to 100, I'll have a win rate of, 5%. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit more of an immature way of thinking about the go-to-market then.
Did you, Adam, get any sales training in this company you joined?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't kind of your traditional sales training. Everything was kind of custom made and homegrown, mm-hmm. but it was quite intense on the training process. And what I also liked about it is you got managerial training in the company as well.
Oh, okay. Well, that's rare. That's rare. Even now, I think
it's really rare. And again, it's one of the things I've taken through in my career. And I believe one of the kind of cornerstones of my success, which is people. I know it's a subject we're going to come on to shortly, but finding good people is not enough. Mm-hmm. Finding good people and creating a pathway for them to succeed, not just in their current roles, but in terms of their career trajectory, is a much healthier approach to building a successful company. And this company, Meltwater, was, had a rule. You couldn't become a manager unless you'd been an IC beforehand. So everyone started at the bottom. You knew your manager had done the job that you were doing and had done it successfully. So again, it created this, they've walked in my shoes, they understand what I'm going through. And it really meant that they were focusing on developing people into managers rather than just successful ICs there.
But it's not true to say that the best salespeople necessarily make the best managers, is it?
Absolutely. Correct. Absolutely. And, I think that was something, again, that's been learnt over time. And you don't necessarily have to be a good salesperson to be a good manager. Perhaps vulnerably speaking, I think I'm a much better manager than I am salesperson. But, I needed to go through that, even if I wasn't such a great salesperson, and it was my work ethic that carried me through and drove my results in order to get to that next level. I think the harsh reality is, if you are looking at your sales reps and you're thinking about progression into management, it is very hard to ignore their sales performance as an indicator of readiness or as a predictor of success, even if it isn't actually a great or accurate indicator. It is a bias that we have when we're judging the success of future managers. So I think that's a great point.
So if you think about the best salesperson you've ever hired, what was it that was special, unique about that person?
I think there are some common denominators amongst the best salespeople that I've hired or worked with. I think the first one is work ethic. I think, you do have to have an element of willing to graft. I know it's perhaps not perceived as PC or kind of, very, very kind of highly regarded approach today, but I've yet to see a salesperson be super successful working, few hours a day, few days a week.
In the long term, I think that's
in the
true.
long term.
You can get lucky in the short term, but in the long term,
but sustainable.
If you look at, we often don't we look at sports as a sort of an analogy or comparison with selling, because I think salespeople typically are very competitive. I mean, quite often that's the case. And the really top professional sports people, they train like hell. They work like dogs, don't they?
Yeah, and I think you'll find the common trait that the most successful ones will not call it work, will not call it training.
Yeah.
This is where kind of and again, being a workaholic, I wouldn't say is a good thing. Having balance and work-life balance, absolutely vital. But I think that kind of bleeds into the next criteria, which is that kind of curiosity, natural curiosity. I have a natural curiosity in or tangential to the work that I'm doing. I've always really enjoyed reading biographies and autobiographies of entrepreneurs. Even before I started work, I just find it fascinating to see.
What was the last one you read? The last entrepreneur's book?
The last one I read, I actually haven't read one for a while. I read the Elon Musk one.
Okay. And what are your thoughts?
I can't say I recommend it.
You can't recommend the book, or you can't recommend him?
The book. Him, I read it because I think he's fascinating and
an extraordinary man.
The smartest man in the planet. But for Walter Isaacson, who wrote the Steve Jobs book, which was outstanding, I felt it was a bit slow. But it's something that, again, as a kid, I was growing up, I read about Richard Branson, Robert Maxwell. Just guys who've just been super successful. Not people necessarily I kind of admire, but just fascination in their journey there.
Yeah. As you're saying, that speaks to curiosity.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be about people. It could be about business. It could be about product. It could be about, macroeconomic conditions, whatever it might be. But I think, again, one question I tend to ask salespeople is, what's their morning routine? Does a person wake up and go onto Instagram and, check all their messages on Facebook or whatever it is people are using today from a social media perspective? Or do they go to TechCrunch? Do they go to, The Economist or whatever it might be? I think it tells a lot about a person, about where their natural tendencies are in terms of curiosity. So I think somebody who's curious around business or around product, I think there is something that drives them, that is just that alignment of their natural passion as well as what they're doing in their working days. And whether a sales career is your calling, maybe that's a bit of an extremity. But I think, being passionate about the work you're doing, being naturally interested in the work that you are doing certainly helps you be successful at that. Comes back to what I believe around sales, which is if you don't actually believe in the product you are selling, you're never going to sell it as well as somebody who does believe in it. And that's always been an indicator for me on when it's time to move on to a different role, which is, if I was the prospect, would I be buying this? If the answer is no, would I actually buy Google Alerts instead of spending £5,000 a year on this media monitoring solution? Yeah, I probably would. So that's when it's a time for me. I think the third criteria that I'd probably say is kind of indicative of the best or innate within the best salespeople that I've worked with, is very tightly aligned to that, but it's acumen. It's not intelligence. It's not academia. Some of the best people I've worked with, I won't name names, didn't go to university, right? And they felt they were inferior as a result of it. But I kind of reminded them they are commercially the most astute people I've ever worked with. And I think that kind of commercial acumen, I don't know if it can be taught. It's this understanding of the way of the world, understanding the way of business, because again, I truly believe in value selling. Whether it's a media monitoring solution, whether it's an employer of record solution, people buy things for three reasons, right? In business, which is to create more revenue, to reduce cost, or to reduce risk. And unless you can quantify how your solution plays into one of those outcomes, people, you're relying on bias, you're relying on relationships only. And so again, I think if you can understand and think about the world or think about your business in that context, I think it positions you a lot better to be empathetic. And empathy is probably the final criteria I'd say is really, really important for the most successful salesperson, is not sympathy, because I think sympathy is wrong for a salesperson, right? You shouldn't be sympathetic that somebody has a budget half of what you are charging. You should be empathetic that they have a budget of half of what you're charging, and your job is to find some middle ground there. That is good negotiation. But you can't negotiate, you can't understand the pains, the challenges, the objectives of the person you are going through without empathy. So I think those are the four criteria that I've seen in the best salespeople I've ever worked with.
You described that very clearly, thank you. What about teams then? How does that all play into? I've noticed, well, you probably noticed this as well. Some of the best salespeople can be a little bit hard to work with at times, can't they? It's always fascinated me when we talk about sales teams in software, but actually they're all individual contributors. So they've all got their own quotas, their own targets. I think I've only ever interviewed one or two sales leaders where there was a team number. That was what people got paid on. So how do you create that team atmosphere? Is it possible to do that when you've got a bunch of hungry pack wolves all chasing after their own goal?
Yeah. Look, I think there is an element to stage fit in this, in that a company will require a different type of salesperson at different stages of its life cycle. And I think my experience is in early stages. It's the passion I have, early stage business. Typically, I join a business before it reaches 10 million, really 5 million ARR. And so I often kind of call that team, the sales team, the founding sales team. They're not the sales team, they're the founding sales team, which is different. There comes an element of responsibility and reminds you of my maxim that if I can hire people who are the future leaders of the business, that for me is a great pathway to success. So the people I look for in those early stage companies are people who don't want to necessarily be salespeople for the next 5 years. They're keen to go into management roles or perhaps get international opportunities as the business expands. Maybe they want to develop some go-to-market for a new product. But they're not, in my mind, the traditional salespeople who might thrive in a much more established, larger business where they have their quota, they hit their quota and they go home. For me, in those early stage businesses, team is everything. Team is absolutely everything, because you don't know the one best way. You don't have a kind of refined and glossy playbook to go to market. And so you need these people to help you figure it out, a lot through failure, a lot through success. But if you're not sharing those failures and success, if you're not, as JFK wisely says, a rising tide raises all boats. If you're not part of that rising tide, then the boat will not raise. So you might be successful in hitting your targets and taking home all your commission, but the business may not be as successful, because it doesn't mean everyone can do that. And the key motion in an early stage business is achieving repeatability. One of the metrics I task my head of sales here at Playroll with is not just the gross quota that he has, but it's the participation of the AEs in that team there. We always talk about 80% at 80% as one of the key metrics of success there. Yeah, he can get to quota by one AE kind of hitting 300%, 400%, right? But for me, that isn't success. So I think team is really important. That's kind of more wide scale. Of course, in different businesses, you are reliant on other people in order to make a sale. You might be reliant on an SDR, you might be reliant on a sales engineer, you might be reliant on customer success or an executive sponsor. And my time working for US headquartered businesses have taught me the kind of idea that a salesperson is the quarterback. They are not necessarily the person who will score the touchdown, but they're the one designing the play. And for me, again, that sense of self-awareness in a salesperson is so important, to say, what is the best play in this current situation right now, rather than I'm going to run everything. And I'm going to be hands-on. So again, that ability to delegate and understand where other people have got a more impactful way of running a part of the process is really, really important as well. So team's absolutely vital.
Gallup have measured the impact a manager has on team performance, and they found that a manager accounts for 70% of the variance in engagement in the team, which would include a sales team.
Yeah.
So what I'm interested in drilling into for a few minutes is, what is it that makes you a good leader? What is it that you do? You said, you were very candid, weren't you? You said, look, I think I'm a better leader or manager than I was as an individual contributor. What is it that's special about you? What do you do that's different to other people that gets a better result? Why do people want to work for Adam Kay? Actually, why should they want to work for Adam Kay?
It's a good question. I mean, I have a whole kind of leadership framework that I use to measure the kind of impact and success of my managers. It's got 10 criteria. And it's quite a useful tool to measure engagement and performance there. Specifically for myself, I think what makes me the manager or leader that I am is I'm very transparent. I don't play politics. And again, I kind of been scarred from my time in a corporate law firm, but it was all politics. There was no meritocracy. So I'm very candid. It doesn't work with everyone. People don't always necessarily like candid feedback. I also have no ego. I don't need to be in the limelight. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to be famous. I don't need that kind of appreciation and respect. My job as a manager and as a leader is to facilitate the success of others. And I'm acutely aware of that. And I will be successful if I can facilitate that. And I think about that when I'm thinking about building out my leadership team, right? I am not a marketer. I don't think I should be the best marketer in the team. The head of marketing or the VP of marketing should be the best marketer in the team. Likewise, my head of sales is a much better salesperson than I am, right? If I was the best salesperson in the team, we'd be in trouble, right? Because I'm the bottleneck. I'm the ceiling. And I think, again, it takes a lot of bravery to recognize that. I think there's an element of insecurity of people hiring people more skilled and more specialized than themselves. And my job as now a second tier manager is to align and motivate my managers to make sure that they're working together efficiently and successfully. Yeah. But I think that type of character traits has enabled me to get the buy-in of my team that I am fully dependent on their success and fully backing their success. And they are absolutely clear on where they stand at any stage in their journey. So there's never any surprises with my sales team, even when it comes to parting ways, which is sadly something that happens a lot in this industry. It's never a surprise. I mean, sometimes it's a surprise, but I would argue that's more of a reflection of the rep themselves than kind of my communication style. Yeah. And I think the other part is, showing I'm human. I have frustrations. I get anxious about things. I get excited and positive about things. And I think, again, that integrity of showing that I have highs and lows like everyone else. And my job is just to be a part of the team rather than a point in the team that everyone is reliant on. I think, again, helps people recognize their position as part of this greater organization rather than I'm here for myself there. So it's really kind of walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Adam, with time has raced along. Actually, rather than walking, we've raced through this conversation. It's flown by. I've only got time for one more question. Are you ready for it?
I hope so.
Let's see. Okay. Good salespeople love asking great questions, don't they? What's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career?
I think it's very easy for me to say at this stage in my career when I have achieved success, and particularly kind of financial success in sales. So I always worry about saying this kind of from this perspective, because obviously it's a lot easier to do so, but money was the main driver for me in my career. Financial independence, financial success, nice car, nice house, holidays, etc. And it is. I'm not going to say it's no longer important. It is absolutely important for me, perhaps for different reasons as I've got older, but it's not the most important thing. And it's not necessarily the key indicator of success for any role. And again, I know when I'm always hiring, like right now at Payroll, for example, we're a bootstrap business. We cannot compete with the highest paying salaries in the industry, yet we want the best salespeople. So for me, Adam K 15 years ago, probably wouldn't have taken a job at Payroll. Simply because I would have looked at the package and said, well, I can get 20%, 30% more elsewhere in a VC-backed or PE-backed businesses or further on, etc. But would that have made me more successful? Would that have made me happier? Would that have grown me as much as I could have done? Probably not. And again, I think that experience of going back into sales at an entry-level role also kind of started me on that learning journey. I went from a very prestigious, well-paid corporate law firm job and took a huge pay cut. And it was worrying. It was really worrying. I had a kid. I had a mortgage. I had responsibilities. I had to pay for things. But I'd learned the lesson that no amount of money is going to buy you job satisfaction. And whilst there are other criteria that and other inputs that determine your satisfaction there, I think there are more important ones than the remuneration. And so remuneration, yes, absolutely forms part of what's important to you when selecting a role and what drives you to push harder. But actually, I think for those who have a longer term viewpoint, thinking more about career and development and success and happiness, there are things that are more important. And again, I appreciate, as the words are leaving my lips, how potentially condescending this sounds, and how cliched it sounds. But it is a lesson that I've certainly learnt acutely more and more over time as I've got older and bolder.
Hey, listen, it's been a great conversation, Adam. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me in.
You're welcome. And thank you to the listener as well. Please do leave a review if you like what you've heard, because it helps to boost the listenership.